MarTechTalk, the live webinar with no presentations, no PowerPoint, just talk.
Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of MarTechTalk. I'm your host, Luke, and today we'll be joined by two wonderful panelists. But before I introduce them, let's set the scene for what we're discussing. This week's topic is pivoting towards your cookieless future. So let's break that down for this discussion. Firstly, can you rely on zero-party and first-party data to meet your lead generation needs? It's clear that third-party cookies are going by the wayside, so are the alternatives currently available going to cut it? We'll then move on to look at how this can work. So what are the strategies for building first-party relationships and incentivizing direct engagement? And of course, all the various issues that go with that, which made third-party cookies so attractive in the first place. Then we'll drill down into the data itself a bit more. That means looking at innovative approaches to leveraging and using data and more secure alternatives. So let's begin by welcoming our lovely guests this week. In no particular order, can I ask you to turn on your camera and mic when I introduce you, please? First, we have Sam Hollander, who is the Chief Growth Officer at cannabis performance marketing firm Mango Media.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi, Sam. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Luke.
And we've also got Richard Rogers, who is Director of Marketing at biotech research company Verdant Technologies. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Luke. Nice to see you again.
Thanks for coming on. Okay, so if it's okay with you guys, let's dive straight into our news item for this week. We've got an article here which is about PepsiCo Mexican Foods that worked with media agency Anagram to break campaign benchmarks without using third-party cookies. Instead, they used Latame's Panorama ID, which is a universal cookieless identifier. And this used a mix of demographic and interest data. And when compared with a cookie-driven model, it actually performed better. Now, in an age where third-party cookie data is about to become obsolete, this kind of tech is becoming more important for marketing. So is this the future of the cookieless world? Sam, I know you've been working in different ways already, so can I come to you first with this one?
Yeah, it's an interesting article. It makes perfect sense. Relying on first-party data, more interest data, behavioral data, some of these various different triggers that we can, or signals, I should say, that we can source from across the web is really all intent signals versus, following a cookie around when a person goes to various different sites and locations across the web, that may tell us something about them, but it may not. You mentioned earlier a little bit about myself and Mango Media, which is a performance marketing firm. And I got into the cannabis space about 5 years ago with a company called Enlighten, and we were one of the first ad tech platforms in cannabis. And due to the nature of the industry, relying on more first-party data signals is really imperative in the industry. And that's just due to the lack of standardization and legalization in the United States when it comes to cannabis. Obviously that is changing in the United States as well as in Europe and certain countries and things like that. But as a result, marketing and specifically digital marketing becomes more and more difficult because you have to abide by various different state laws. So what we've seen is layering on various contextual signals and other behavioral and interest signals tends to drive much higher results. So I'm not surprised by this article and what happened with Coke.
Okay, thank you. And I'll pass over to you, Richard, next.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, especially where they were doing this. I'd love to see more results, especially in the US and in Europe. But what's interesting for me is that the cookieless audience had a 42% higher reach and also was much more cost effective by about 2 times. So for me, they're the type of numbers that I'm looking at. I really for me, it's really important not to spend where you don't need to, and to avoid waste as much as possible. I think that this is actually going to help us get better and do that. It really does light a fire under companies like Lotame and LiveRamp and others, because they have to do this. And for us, I'll say as a consumer, not as a marketer or advertiser, the privacy angle of this it's important to me as well, because having that privacy protection, and knowing that things are going to change, and it's happening pretty soon, I think is a positive. And you see things like what Apple was doing, but for the most part, you really do need to understand as a marketer that this is going to change. Just like I see a lot of companies and clients I talk to that are, GA4 is coming, and it's been coming for a while, and it's like, wow, we really got to do this now, guys, right? The cookieless future is coming too, and that's going to happen very, very soon before you know it. So you have to, think about marketing and advertising in a different way. And this article, it is good. I mean, it's a proof point that, this is going to work. It's not going to go away. Where I've talked to others in this space, I think there's still a bit of a cautious approach, but having these proof points like this article is a really good thing. I hope we see more of it, but also more of how the consumer's privacy is going to be protected as well. Just because you have, one necessary evil doesn't mean the next one that's coming is going to be any better. So these universal identifiers, I'm keeping an eye on that as well, especially what Google's going to do. I think we're all waiting to see how are they really going to attack this, and what are they going to do to address this. But for me, it's a good proof point.
I think also, just adding to that, the proof is in the pudding, and we're seeing improved results. And, Richard earlier in the conversation mentioned, it's a little bit more efficient, right? We're in some ways potentially going into a recession. I don't know that we've necessarily gone into that recession yet. And when that happens, marketing budgets are typically the first things to be slashed. So as a result of being able to use some of these signals, and the proof that it is providing more efficiency, allows us to go out and have a better narrative for clients about why they should be leveraging digital medium in a cookieless future during a downturn, so that they can continue to be front and center in front of their consumers.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we'll move on from the news then, and segue from that into talking about first party and zero party data, and how that meets lead generation needs. I know, Sam, you were saying, working in the cannabis world, that's not the easiest thing to do. Do you want to talk a bit more about that, perhaps?
Yeah, for sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, I helped start an ad tech company about 5 years ago, when there were very few and far between in the cannabis space, and at least the United States and Canada. As a result of that, there were not many digital outlets that you could leverage to be able to reach consumers in an efficient way. So, to be able to start to do that, you really needed to be able to understand who those consumers were to eliminate waste. And the best way to do that is through first-party data. First-party data is cookieless, right? So when I say first-party data, we're talking about loyalty data from consumers that are walking into a dispensary, point of sale data from purchase behaviors from consumers in a dispensary, visitation data, visitation data like foot traffic data when people are going into a dispensary. Additionally, publication data when you're signing up for a publication like MJ Biz, which is an industry trade, things of that nature. So, being able to source that in an effective and efficient way, and then being able to model that so that we could actually have reach in recreational and medicinal states was really vital for our success. We're starting to see a lot more of it now. It was very difficult in this space. I know when we were chatting yesterday in our brief before this, I had mentioned about how in this industry, because of the nascency of the industry and because it's a very sensitive topic, a lot of dispensary owners are really trying to abide by HIPAA compliance, even though they don't have to. So as a result of that, they're very hesitant to share that first party data. But it is becoming more and more prevalent. And as you have those educational conversations with clients, they start to really understand the importance of that data and how they can leverage it to start to, as an example, drive new customer acquisition, lower their customer acquisition costs and things of that nature.
Right. So in that space, sort of first party data can actually be more reliable than third party.
Yeah, I think it's really, in my opinion, imperative. I'm not going to say that us, when we built our platform and ultimately got acquired by Weedmaps, that we weren't still using third party data. We absolutely were. Part of that is just industry trend, right? And where we've all been kind of rooted in and relying on cookies for so long. So it takes a while to build out these pieces of technology and data warehouses to be able to have scale with that first party data. But it is definitely more important to be able to reach consumers for sure.
Okay, thank you. And Richard, how have your experiences gone with that? The reliability of these varying kinds of data?
Well, I think it's interesting because I've seen in the past year a bit more fraud, and I think it just puts more of an effort on understanding the traffic, the customer journey, and looking at making sure you've got your analytics and attribution tight. I think this puts a bit more pressure on that as well. Having, with third-party cookies going away, you really need to go out and become, in one way, more engaging with your customers in content on different channels. One of the challenges I see, and one of the opportunities also, is looking at some of the industry publications that are out there that I typically would probably say, you know what, it's a nice to have, we'll do it, but I don't really trust a lot of it because I can't really track a lot of it. And a lot of especially in different industries I've worked in, the tracking technology just wasn't there. It was almost like 2000. I mean, you buy a banner ad and that's it. You just spend, $1,500 and that's all you see is your ad on their website or their email newsletter, but you don't get any other data around that. You really have to be good at trying to track it from there. I mean, we have UTM and stuff like that, but we don't see any of that sophistication in those publishers. And hopefully this pushes them into that sort of that club to get those universal IDs going with that. But I think from a marketing standpoint, it also is an opportunity in that we need to think about content in a different way and become more engagement. I love video. I think this is a great opportunity to do more in video as well, and look for opportunities in social media as well. Personally, I've worked with clients and done this myself, where some of that ad display budget is being shifted into, walled gardens. It's going into other things like LinkedIn more or Facebook more. Whereas we probably wouldn't have had that if this push for cookieless wasn't happening. I've been in B2B. So for me, it's targeting accounts and buying committees within those accounts, which we can typically find who those buying committees are, the VPs or directors or whoever, and we can target them pretty precisely. When it comes to the B2C side, it gets a little bit fuzzy, as you know, but I think it also creates an opportunities for marketers to, one, get better and make sure that they're on top of their analytics and attribution, and look at other opportunities for engaging and getting content into their potential customers. You can't get first party data unless you get those customers coming in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose that sort of reliability then is something, like you're saying there, that can draw in more people to use this data. So people before that were just banner adding and keeping it simple are going to be coming on board now, and there's going to be more not more competition, but more demand for the data.
More demand. I think looking at opportunities where you capture that, whether it's on our site or whether it's with a publisher, things like webinars that we've done or podcasts that we've done, where we are able to get better data on the visitor that's coming to those pages, capture their information, having them opt in for that as well. So consent management is also going to be an issue for us moving forward, especially with what's GDPR and California privacy. So really making sure when we work with those third parties, if we do a webinar or podcast with them, if they're opting in for that, if it's walled, we want to capture that as well. But we also make sure that our customers, our visitors, are aware of that. So I'll put my legal hat on. You also want to look at some of your privacy policies as well. Now that the cookieless future is there, universal IDs are happening. What other things are out there that maybe you're old dusting off your privacy policy from 2017? It may not work today. So I think you need to look at that as well and look at that consent management and how we go about getting the consumers to opt in for us, whether it's on our site or third parties, and then getting that first party data to market to. And retargeting then becomes it's a bit cleaner and easier.
Yeah, and I mean that kind of moves on to our next point, the strategies for building first party relationships and sort of incentivizing that data engagement. And yeah, Sam, it sounds like that's been a challenge for you that you've touched on already, but I wonder if you wanted to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean it really kind of goes across the board, right? It's not just in cannabis, it's almost every vertical where you really need to figure out a strategy to reach your consumer, whether that's loyalty programs, incentivizing them to sign up for something, whether it's a webinar like Rich mentioned a little bit earlier, or some kind of unique content, and you really need to make sure that your strategy is innovative and there's some kind of, I hate using the word transaction, but that's really what it is, right? At the end of the day, that transaction is providing something unique that the consumer is going to want and demand. And if you can do that, then you can most likely get them to sign up for something or give them your personal information so that you have some kind of link to create that first party data signal. So in cannabis, it's very much loyalty programs, but we are also in a unique situation because of the nature of the business, where you do have to come in and prove that you're 18 years old to be able to purchase a product, very similar to purchasing a liquor product. And by way of that, there's already a link there when you walk into the dispensary within the point of sale that we can look at. So, but again, that also goes back to what Rich was talking about before. You kind of got to dust off that privacy policy and make sure that you're up to date on everything, and your consumers are opting in, and that you're above board.
Yeah, and I suppose that's also going to change state by state, right? So that's another layer to that.
Absolutely, and every state is a little bit different. As an example, in Florida and Pennsylvania, it's very, very difficult to advertise digitally to the consumer. In Florida, for example, everything has to go through the DOJ before it gets approved, which can take anywhere from a few weeks to several months to actually be able to get something activated. So from a strategic perspective, you really need to be planning months in advance, understanding that it could take you a long time to get something, up and running, versus, California, which is a state, as we all know, where cannabis was basically a first mover in this country. And I don't want to say you can do whatever you want, but there's a lot more flexibility within the world of digital marketing and a lot more outlets to be able to connect with consumers.
So that slower moving ship, the kind of the long plan stuff, is that where the first party data is more useful, because it's presumably more solid than the third party stuff, where you're aiming a bit more loosely?
Yeah, I would say in a way, it definitely is. It's more about the restrictions within each state that ultimately actually comes down to the creative that you're delivering. But again, that can be leveraged as one of those transactions, as I mentioned earlier, where you're providing something to the consumer. It's some kind of content that they may want. So there can be some kind of exchange there. So you could be getting first party data in an easier way in some of those states because of that.
Okay. And Rich, what about your experiences then in building these first party data relationships?
Typically, what we try to do is, one, look at what content we currently have and try to make it more relevant now. Understanding that first party data at a deeper level than what we may have done before, as we're pushing, and a lot of companies doing this, that they're creating their content factories. Are we able to track, from top down, that particular interest that consumer has, or in my case, if it's an account, many people in that account are interested in this particular product line or this pain point. Are we, from a content standpoint, solving that? Are we feeding that to them? And then are we able to really track from a first party standpoint what they're really interested in doing? And before, I would say you've had this slow drip of content. Once they come to your site, they get to a landing page, they fill out a form, 2010 world. And then you do email 1, email 2, email 3, and they're not even interested in any of that. Or it's not really personalized as much. So for me, to answer your question, I think it becomes a matter of getting better at personalization to really, truly, deeply understand that customer and what they're interested in doing, so that you become a better marketer. And from a content standpoint, you can feed the beast. I mean, we look at a content matrix of, do we have the right use case studies, and are we answering these problems at a deeper level for each particular type of customer that we have, whether it's by the industry or the size of that company, whether it's an enterprise or a mid-size or smaller company, each one of those different pain points, but we're only talking about the enterprise maybe. So we have to get better, maybe publish more content, but get better at how we're tagging and tracking that content, and then looking overall back to the analytics, how that first party is like engaging with us with that content, and then start to either look for gaps, which is not an easy thing, and filling that, or looking at what's working and try to do more of that. But I think it creates a different relationship with your customers and visitors, and it really does make you a better marketer in the end. So again, another positive in this as a consumer, I think you get more relevant, personalized information, hopefully, from a lot of the sites that you visit. And as a marketer, it kind of keeps you on your toes to keep producing that and do better.
I think yesterday you mentioned about sort of more niche landing pages. Is that kind of where the feedback's going to go back into the creative and sort of come back around?
Well, I think so. And I think that some of the technology is also going to be able to help generate a lot of that on the fly. I mean, we on our talk before, we talked about how AI is going to make an impact with marketing. I think it's a perfect example. As you have your tagging and tracking set up right, you have understanding of that customer. If it's first party, if you know who they are, in fact, having them come into a site for a particular product line or pain point, you are able to then generate on the fly. I think this is going to be happening, content that's really personalized for them. And from an account-based marketing standpoint, you have your tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And at the top of tier 1, you're really, really personalized. And then it goes down, it starts to become more broad. You're going to be able to do, I think, at a ABM at scale, content now with AI that's going to be able to generate that almost tier 1 personalization to the masses, which is going to be exciting. Again, it's some of that content's going to have to be drawn up in advance, and you're going to have to figure out what's important and what's needed. But I think a lot of it will start to then become an AI driven opportunity, which, again, you got to track all of that. You got to figure it out. And those personalized landing pages are going to be coming, and you're going to have somebody in a team of people that really starts to analyze the data very closely and almost a real-time basis for some companies.
Yeah, I was really flip-flopping there between AI being less work and then AI being more work. And I think that's going to be one of the things, isn't it? It's going to create teams. There's going to be a lot of change, right?
It's exciting. I mean, you're going to be able to generate videos on the fly for customers, photographs on the fly. I mean, things that we are not even thinking about doing right now in marketing, or just way too expensive for us to do that. It's all going to start to happen. And as AIs, you've already seen from ChatGPT to AutoGPT, this 1 month jump in how AI is advancing already. There's a lot of this coming along, and marketers need to jump onto that. Again, cookieless future is the topic today, but it all does play hand in hand in that if we want to have better first party relationships and get that data, we need to have better content. And that better content is either going to be written by us or it's going to be written by AI that's going to be relevant. And we need to make, again, more teams are needed to make sure that that AI content is actually relevant and firing to those consumers' interests.
Mm-hmm. Just bringing it back to third-party cookies, we've had a question from, well, we've got a few questions actually from our audience, but I'll start off with David here, who's asked, which industries/functions do the panelists think will struggle the most with the demise of third-party cookies? And similarly, what is their advice to those people? Either of you ready to go first, or Sam, shall I jump to you?
I definitely think it's my industry. Just given the nature of how nascent it is, the ambiguity, and how difficult it is already to get consumers to give you their personal information, especially when it comes to a product that there's still, in some ways, a stigma associated with it. The stigma has definitely subsided drastically from where it was 4 or 5 years ago, but it still exists. And whenever there is that type of stigma, people want to give you their information less and less because they don't want to be associated with it. So I think that the cannabis industry is definitely going to have a difficult road ahead. And then in addition to that, it's not just the value exchange with the consumer giving you their data, it's also the adoption from the industry as a whole. We are still very much in a building phase. We have gone a very, very far way over the last 5 to 10 years from where the industry was, to adopting digital technology and tracking and attribution and all of these various different things that we've been talking about throughout this conversation. But there's still a long road ahead. And because marketing budgets are small and there are so many other ancillary things that companies are worried about for their bottom line, marketing tends to kind of get put by the wayside and budgets tend to be smaller, which means that there's going to be, I don't want to say less adoption, it's just going to be a slower path to adoption because we're all going to be forced to adopt it in some way, shape, or form over the next 6 months. So, I definitely think the cannabis industry, and to add to that a little bit more, I think any industry that is similar to the cannabis industry, the emerging psychedelic industry, gambling and fantasy sports, pornography and adult content, etc. I think they're all going to have a difficult time in this field for those reasons.
Thank you. Yeah. And I'll pass over to you, Richard, and any advice you can offer to people as well. That would be helpful, I imagine.
Sure. I actually don't think that, maybe unless you're a cookie tracking company or a technology company that focuses on cookies, you're going to go out of business. But I think I'm just joking, but I think what it does is I think it looks at, I think we have to look at some of the larger advertisers over the next couple of years. A lot of the CPG companies, car companies in particular, there's a lot of reliance on the third party cookies from some of these advertisers. What do they do in the short term if they can't get in front of that prospective car buyer that now, because of cookies, you're able to see that they're interested in, a new car, or they're looking at used cars, whatever it would be, then you're able to do that. Just as an example, there might be a bit of a dip, but I think it becomes more fluid. I think the advertising dollars then go into somewhere else. But there might be a slight performance dip, but I think overall, I think it's going to get better. And I think that these companies are going to adapt. So I would say probably the advice is to be quick in moving, and not really be scared to try new things when it comes to advertising. And short term, maybe look at doing some things that you haven't done before, and look at your budgets on a consistent basis so that you can shift and pivot pretty quickly, and not get stuck into a January budget when all of a sudden in June it's not firing right. It's not working right all of a sudden for you in 24 or 25.
I think partnerships are also key, right? As we're adopting new forms of technology and tracking and trying to reach consumers, Richard talked about automotive. if you're an OEM, Mercedes, Volkswagen, Land Rover, Jaguar, whoever you are, you should be partnering then if you're having difficulty getting that data, or if you're a tier 3 dealership, as an example, even, you should then go out and partner with, companies like Edmunds and, some of these other big publishers and aggregators of data so that you can better reach your consumers. And those are all first party signals.
Nice. Yeah. Well, there you go, David. I think just being here and listening to these guys is proof that you're making the right moves at the right time ahead of this. I'll move on to one more here from Esme. How do you think Google will manage the cookieless future? That's quite a big one. We did touch on it earlier. I think Richard, you mentioned about Google. Did you want to take this one initially?
Yeah, I think they're going to do whatever they can do to dominate it in their own way. There was hesitancy for them to go and look at universal IDs, and then there was a bit of a shift back into that and accepting it. I think that they're going to come out with something that's going to allow them to maintain their dominance. The thing that I think they're a bit scared of, though, is what's happening on again, back to the AI side of things, and how that could replace or Bing becoming more relevant in people's lives. I think that becomes a bit scary for them, but I think they already know. We don't know, but they already know. They're gonna figure it out and dominate it. But they've already got plans for that. But we'll figure that out. We'll find that out later.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with everything that Rich is saying. They've already been doing it, even though they've kind of put some projects on the wayside, like their sandbox project. The proof is there, right? If you go and you read any article about what they're doing, they've been working on this. They're going to continue to work on this, and they are the market leader. Them, Facebook to an extent. So they're going to go and figure it out, and they're going to lead the way, just like they always do.
Yeah, and that leads on to our next point. In terms of leading the way, we're going to be talking about innovative approaches to leveraging and using data and more secure alternatives. Sam, do you want to carry on and dip into that?
Yeah, secure alternatives are, making sure you're working with the right partners to verify your data, upload your data, and make sure that you can use it the right way. We talked about Lotame earlier in this conversation in the article. They're obviously a great partner to be able to do that. Others like LiveRamp are good resources as well. There's a few of them out there, but at the end of the day, it's a value exchange to be able to get that data, and then making sure that you're abiding by privacy compliance and working with a third-party partner to be able to leverage that data and make sure it's secure. In many circumstances, you can try and do it yourself, but at least from what I've found, especially in the cannabis industry, where there is some hesitancy around leveraging that data, most people want a third-party intermediary. They don't want to just rely on you, so that they can ensure that the data is in fact scrubbed, safe, accurate, and ready to go.
So yeah, LiveRamp as a kind of preset, kind of because of the name, because people know the name. They know.
Yeah, most people in the industry know LiveRamp, Lotame, and there's a few other smaller ones, but those are really the two big ones that most people are familiar with.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Richard, I know you've mentioned about the security side of things before.
Yeah, I think Sam made some great points, especially with LiveRamp. I think it's important to be able to use your spend wisely, but also use it in a way that has the most effective reach. And I think that what Lotame's doing, what LiveRamp and working together, I think that this is going to make it, again, I'm very positive about this. I think it's going to make it better for marketers and advertisers in the long run, and also for consumers, in that you're going to get more relevant, better ads delivered to you that are more personalized, taking to those personalized landing pages like we talked about, that are really very, very hyper targeted and personalized to what you are absolutely looking for, how it could address that need that you have. The innovation is how do we get that content to that customer, and how do we get that customer aware of it initially? So I think branding is for me, I think another opportunity. I think companies that have strong brands are, are known. It's the smaller ones that are trying to get those brands out there for the first time that maybe they're going to have to push a bit more into their brand advertising now. And they don't have the ability to go out and do advertising through cookies anymore based on, what customers have been looking at and doing across the web. But maybe they look at how do we spend that money on a brand that long term will pay dividends. It's a bit more investment up front, especially if it's a new brand, but long term it's going to pay off. People remember the brands, and that's what I think will start to happen as well. As far as an innovation side of things, there's going to be, every time that there's something like this in technology that happens, there's always like 100 companies that come out and 3 of them that then dominate. This is going to set up some opportunities for some companies that hopefully the startup world out there is already well ahead of this and thinking about ways that they can capture this moment, because there is an opportunity here for companies that are aggressive and innovative to step in here. And 10 years ago, people never heard of LiveRamp or Loadme. Marketers still don't know about these companies, which is, if they're not doing this. But I think there's going to be other companies like that will address a lot of these issues.
It's interesting. We live in a digital world, and we're having a conversation about leveraging data to, target audiences, first party data specifically. But I really do think that the 1950s Madison Avenue MedMen would really love this time, because we're going back to a time where content is really becoming king again.
Yeah, and like we said about the AI, it's sort of allowing more people to get in touch with that. And I wonder, Richard, you mentioned earlier about B2B versus B2C. Do you see it being easier for B2B to go more directly than B2C?
In a way, yes. But in a different way. I always looked at sort of like B2B as chess and B2C as checkers. B2C is just more fun and it's fast, and it's just more opportunities out there. I think when it comes to B2B, you have to be more of a strategic marketer and advertiser to get in front of that exact buying committee and understand that account at a deeper level before you go out and attack them and get in front of them. Whereas in the consumer side, there's just more opportunity to go out there, and I think a bit more rope in case you do fail, and what your approach is, your content, your ads. Maybe if they're not firing with that particular audience, you can adjust quickly, and there's just more to go after. B2B though gives you a bit more on the data side, because at the end of the day, we're targeting accounts, and there's contacts, consumers behind those accounts, but the tools like the CDP in particular for B2B, I've worked with Lattice Engines before. Having the ability to understand the total addressable market, narrow down and figure out the ideal customer profile within each of the tiers that you're going after. If you do that hard work in advance, you get a pretty good idea of who is really the target account that you want at each of those different levels, and then you adjust your spend, your resources into each of those tiers based on that potential opportunity and what is the goal and objective that you're trying to achieve here. To get in front of them, you pretty much have an idea of what the content, the pain point, the solutions that you offer into each of those tiers at the different levels, whether it's the account level or the industry level or more broad. And then it becomes a challenge of getting in front of them. Tools like, I've used Lattice, allows you to do the matching and allows you to then track which accounts are coming into the pipeline with Bombora, for instance. So now we start to see that there's intent signals coming in. A lot of these things on the B2B side are just not there on the B2C side, as the consumer privacy issues I talked about before are more prevalent. On the account side, it's a bit less. One thing that we do actually, I think, have an advantage of also is doing account matching. So if we're doing a matched audience across LinkedIn, for instance, we're really going to get in front of those companies that we want to be in front of. And then the challenge is making sure that we are going after the right companies, and that becomes a marketing data play. So I think for me, I've been doing B2B for the longest time, and I know it, and I feel that B2B has a bit more of an advantage in how we use data because we are going after the account side of things rather than those individual consumers, which is a bit more tricky, especially globally.
I think I agree with everything that you're saying. And, from building demand gen ecosystems for various different companies, I've always found it easier in the B2B ecosystem because, going back to what we were talking about earlier, creating that value exchange tends to be a little bit easier. Most people are a lot more willing to give you their information in exchange for something that's going to progress their career in some way, shape, or form. And as soon as you get that signal, you kind of have an idea of who they are, where they're working, and what they're really about, whether it's marketing, operations, finance, so on and so forth. Whereas, if you're talking about a CPG brand like Coca-Cola, sure, it's easy if Coke wants to target a millennial sports fan, right? You can go after and easily find people that are sports fans, but it's a lot harder to get a value exchange for, a Coke product, a physical soft drink.
Yeah, I mean, I can see where even on the forums we've had, B2C, B2B, I think people are, as to your point, Sam, I think people are more reluctant to give their personal email addresses or give you a fake or, one of their 4 personal email addresses maybe. Whereas in the business side, I think they're like, yeah, just use this and we can block it later. Like they're a bit more eager, I think, to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering when you were talking about that, about how Twitter is going to fit into all of this. Data. Yeah. I know you mentioned it, Sam. How do you think that fits?
Well, it's an interesting time to be in the cannabis industry because historically, all of the major social platforms, as well as Google, would not allow marketers within the industry to advertise on their platforms. Now, you can still go within those platforms and, on Instagram, as an example, create a page and upload your content, whether it's video content, stories, pictures, use your hashtags, all of that different type of stuff, but you could not physically advertise. On Google, you can do SEO and SEM, but you cannot do paid search, where if you're a dispensary, it's going to pop up for a consumer and say, hey, you're 3 miles away from my store. Same thing with Twitter, but our friend Elon Musk was so nice a few weeks ago to decide to allow cannabis advertisers to start to advertise on Twitter. While there are some positives and negatives to that tied to performance overall, it's a brand new outlet for the cannabis industry, which is intriguing. Earlier we were talking about first-party data signals and how the walled gardens really have much more data in terms of who your specific consumer or various different cohorts may be. So having that option, on Twitter's platform is very compelling in the cannabis industry and allows you to take a completely different marketing approach than most marketers within the industry have historically used. As an example, think aligning, your dispensary or your CPG brand, which the cannabis industry is becoming much more CPG focused, with the Super Bowl or the NHL and NBA playoffs, which are currently going on. Historically, there was really no outlet to do that outside of just targeting sports fans. So now you can go in and, aggregate followers and people that are interested in those things. And, the live setting that Twitter, the live conversational setting that Twitter presents, which is a completely different outlet. And I think it's going to be very interesting for the industry. And I'm curious to see over the next, several months if any of the other platforms follow. My guess is because of all the privacy issues with Google, that Google is not going to take the time to do that. They're going to wait for some form of federal legalization or other form of standardization across the US, which is still going to most likely be some time from now. But Facebook and Instagram could happen at some point soon. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't like to fall too far behind when he sees his competitors doing things that allow them to get even one step ahead. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. I'm conscious that we're running out of time, but it'll be good to meet up again perhaps in a few months and see how the conversation's changed. But we like to end here usually with a question, nice short answer question to sort of sum up. And this week we've got: will the cookieless future breed innovation and hope, or are we looking at tough times ahead? So either or. Sam, what do you think?
Both.
Both? Ah, okay.
I think it's a combination of both. I think there's definitely going to be difficult times ahead. There's always difficult times with innovation and change, right? Because it means that people have to innovate, they have to change, they have to adopt new things that they're not used to, that they haven't been using for long times, that for a long time, that becomes second nature, and that always presents hurdles for people. But there are a lot of smart people in this industry, and I think that it will happen. The adoption will happen, and the change will be for the better in terms of delivering more personalization, as we talked about earlier. And I think ultimately that's what consumers want, and that all ties back to that value exchange that we've been talking about as well.
Okay, thanks, Sam.
Yep.
And Richard, are we looking at innovation and hope, or tough times ahead, or both?
Yeah, I think Sam's made a great point. I think there's going to be a lot of short-term pain for some marketers out there, but I think overall, I'm very hopeful. As I said, I think there's a lot of opportunity now that's going to be coming up in the next couple of years because of this and other technology advancements. So I'm excited to see what happens.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for joining us. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Sam. Good to have you on today. And thanks to our guests and our audience even. If you're around next week, Tuesday, April the 25th, we're back at 3 p.m. BST, where we'll be talking about increasing conversions through smarter use of your customer data platform. So until then, have a great week, and goodbye for now.